Welcome to the Property Elite podcast. I'll be your host, Jen Lehman, Chartered Surveyor and co-founder of Property Elite. Stay tuned each week for more on industry hot topics, market updates and new RICS guidance.
Hi everyone, this is Rachel from Property Elite. I'm chatting with Tatenda today, and Tatenda is a director of Mako, and she's also a consultant with Property Elite and has worked with us for quite a while. So she's going to be chatting with us today about our competencies for the APC. So over to you, Tatenda, to just bring us into that subject.
Yeah, sure. So with competencies, a lot of people are questioning like what competencies should they be picking, and I guess for me the first thing I would say that they need to align with your experience. Why they need to align with your experience is that's where you're going to be able to write up the most. So for example, I did the commercial pathway, and so I know for certain leasing and letting, sales, all those sort of things are really, really important. So make sure you your work experience aligns with the projects that you're currently doing, and ensure that you have real life examples to do. And also, I would definitely say like you need to consider your career goals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people choose their competencies quite early in the process, don't they? Can they change them if they find that things aren't fitting for them?
I definitely think you can change them as long as they are during that period, because you've got the whole 2 years of obviously structured training, and you can speak to your supervisor and say, you know, you're enjoying this part of this part of your job, and you would like to focus more on this part, because a lot of graduates also have rotations, and so ensuring that you can maneuver, but probably earlier on, so that you still have a lot of time to actually have the full experience.
Yeah, so, absolutely. I mean, I think people can choose their competencies quite early on, or they sort of think that they have to make those choices quite early on, but they can adapt that, can't they? But as you say, you want to kind of do that perhaps within the first year of deciding what you're definitely going to choose by the end of year one, in my experience. But I think that a lot of candidates sort of think that that's set in stone, and then they worry because they're not getting enough experience in certain areas.
Yeah, no, you can definitely maneuver that. But as you said, a year is definitely the safest thing to do, because you don't want to change 6 months until your submission, and then you're, panicking.
Yeah, that's right. You need to have those examples, don't you? At particularly level 3, you need to have preferably 3 examples of work that you've done. So obviously you've got to have the time to get that under your belt. So you mentioned considering your career goals when you're choosing your competencies. What do you mean by that?
So so for example, I can use commercial, because the commercial pathway is quite varied. You could, if you want to do valuation, for example, you need to make sure that you're doing valuation to level 3. But the commercial pathway also includes property management, etc. And so if that is not the pathway that you are intending to go to, you wouldn't necessarily choose those competencies. And so it's a good practice anyway to obviously have a plan to say, this is what I would like to do. That's why you are doing your APC. And so as long as they're aligned with your career goals, and not saying that they might not change in the future, but obviously for this practice, they need to align with your career goals and make sure you are a safe pair of hands to carry out that job that you are trying to strive to do.
Yeah, and that'll depend a lot on opportunities within the firm you work for, and also it'll depend on what you're good at, what you feel good at and what you're enjoying doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So next tip then, balancing your mandatory and optional competencies. So talk me through that.
So sorry. So yes, so in terms of, they are mandatory ones like ethics, client care, communication, and those have to be covered. And so you do need to be well versed in those, because those are mandatory, and you can't change those. And
Yeah.
then and these are really important things that we need to obviously be aware of. We need to be, have strong ethics, client care, and communication. These are all sort of your basic knowledge that you should naturally have. And then optional competencies, which should complement your strengths and interests, as you've mentioned.
Yeah.
What are you strongest at, and where do your interests lie? Because you need to be able to retain the information, and you need to enjoy it. You're going to be doing this for, until you change your mind, or for a good I don't know, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, eventually. Gosh, yeah. Okay, and then we talked about levels of competencies, haven't we? So perhaps you can give some candidates guidance on how to choose the right levels.
Yes, for sure. So level 1 would be your knowledge and understanding. So what do you know about that particular competency? And
Mr. Cutting, does that cover, for instance, legislation, RICS guidance? Would that be the sort of thing you're writing up at level 1?
Yes, that is definitely what you're writing at level 1.
Yeah.
What you know with the guidance. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then at level 2, what are you including there?
So that's applying knowledge and advising. And so you may choose things like, I guess it also depends on the pathway you're choosing. So mine are likely going to be commercial, because that's what I'm aware of. So that might be, for example, something like service charges or property management, or
it's basically evidencing that you've actually had experience of putting that into practice, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's things that you are knowledgeable about and you've advised and had experience on. Spot on.
And then level 3, moving on to that advice piece of, actually knowing the competency well enough to be able to give clients detailed advice and give them options, and help them to choose the right options for them under the circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the difference between whether you should choose a competency to level 2 or level 3 is really sort of getting down to that detail, isn't it? Being confident about the detail and client advice around a competency. Okay, so the next tip is about being realistic. So again, that's always a challenge for us, I think. How would you advise candidates to be realistic in their competency choices?
I definitely would say don't write anything, or don't choose a competency that you cannot evidence. If you've not had any experience in it, if you don't have any anything past knowledge about it, so for example, those shouldn't be going into, for example, your level 2 or level 3s, because there's no experience there. And also your final submission must show like practical application. So you won't be able to reference back if you've not actually carried out that particular experience, and you'll fail on ethics as well because you're lying. So it's very important to be able to evidence what you're actually.
And that's where it ties in with what we're talking about around examples, doesn't it? So your evidence will be picking examples from your experience and actually setting them out in your summary of experience. So that is what confirms that you've got that experience to level 2 and level 3. Yeah. So, and understanding what that looks like involves, understanding the pathway guide, doesn't it? So that comes on to our next point. So, what's in the pathway guide, Tatenda?
So each different APC pathway has its own different requirements.
Yeah, and they really are different, aren't they, between, say, residential or rural or commercial, real estate. There's so many different pathways, and each combination of competencies is different for each pathway. So you need to understand what that combination looks like for your particular pathway, first of all. And then I think it's just when you're coming to choosing those competencies, what advice would you give for people around the pathway guide?
I would definitely say that you need to ensure that your choices comply with the pathway expectations. So it's this whole thing is showing how competent you are, how safe pair of hands you are. So you need to be answering those questions in a relevant manner. And so, yes, so adhering to the guide and making sure that you are fulfilling what those different, like your particular pathway.
Yeah, because there's a lot of detail in the pathway guide, isn't there, on each competency, and it actually gives you examples of what that competency could look like at level 2 and level 3. So it's a really good practice to read through that when you're choosing your competencies and make sure that you understand what you're going to be required to evidence. The one thing I think people get a bit confused about is that they don't have to evidence all of that list. It's only part of that list or some of that list to evidence their experience at level 2 and level 3. But yeah, it's important to know what that means. And actually, when you're starting at the outset, that's not terribly clear, is it? So again, comes back to the point about reviewing that perhaps 6 months in or at your regular meetings, which you should have organised with your counsellor.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's really covered the subject quite well. There's a lot more we could talk about, but we have a finite time. So thanks very much, Tatenda. Lovely to speak with you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Property Elite podcast this week. Head to our website to check out our full blog, free and paid support resources and services, free consultation for every single RICS APC and RICS candidate, and also ask us any questions you have via the website chat blog. See you next week.